Hi, everyone. My name is Kerry Shuttlecorp. I'm the president of ChinaSource, and it's really great to welcome you to the ChinaSource Connect, the last one of 2022. And you will immediately recognize that we don't have Joanne Pittman with us today, and we're missing her immensely. She's not feeling all that well herself. She's got a cold, but it's more a matter for her mother, Gracie, who is 95 years old and has flu and pneumonia that landed her in the hospital in Minneapolis. So Joanne is where she needs to be with her family, with Gracie. Gracie, it appeared, had a good night last night in the hospital. But if you know Joanne, please send her your greeting, and we'll open now and be praying for her and invite the Lord into this Connect event. Let's pray together. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the wonder of Advent season, when we can wait and listen and worship and hope and trust. And despite all the other things surrounding us, know that you sent your son, Emmanuel, to reconcile everything in heaven and on earth to yourself through his blood. And we thank you for that reminder today. We thank you that you have called us together as your brothers and sisters in Christ with a great heart for the Chinese people, for the Chinese church, the diaspora, and the global Great Commission. And we just invite you to be with us, and that you will inform our conversation. You will encourage our faith and our ministry together, that we'll have a sense of hope going forward, even when there are really discouraging things that people are facing. We just give you this time, and we're so grateful that the joy of the Lord is our strength. We praise you today in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. I want to just walk you through. That'd be good to walk through the program a little bit. I'm going to provide a brief ChinaSource update in just a minute, and then we're going to welcome Brent to share an update on China and a church update. And then we're going to segment. We're going to have a couple of Q&A times, because we want to focus the first Q&A time on what Brent shares regarding the China and the church update. And then we'll welcome Narcy Her, our content manager, to come and share a content update, which will be really encouraging. I think many of you that are on this call have been enjoying some very stimulating interaction by way of blog and ChinaSource Quarterly recently. And then Brent's going to come back and offer a presentation on member care as is part of the mission, and we'll have another Q&A about that. I'll share some concluding remarks, and then we'll have some in the last half hour, right at the top of the hour, we'll move into optional breakout rooms for discussion and fellowship and prayer. We'll share some of the prayer requests in case you're not able to stay with us, but we hope you can stay with us so we can have a time to share, get to know each other better, and pray together. So thank you so much for coming. Well, I just want to share a little bit about ChinaSource this past year. This year has been no, let's not do the update quite yet. I need to introduce the rest of the team. Sorry, guys. These are the guys that you may not hear presenting, but hopefully you'll see them in our breakout room. So Rachel Anderson is our assistant content manager. Peter Arneson is our director of advancement. Eunice Choi is our senior administrator. Dan Kennicott is our director of finance and as well as strategic planning. And Emerald Lam is our administrator in our Hong Kong office. So you may see some of them in the breakout rooms, but we're so grateful. Some of us on the team work full-time, some work part-time, and then we have scores of contributors who are involved as part of the ChinaSource network, that maybe they provide content or prayer or financial support. We're so grateful many of you enter into those or all of those categories. So we're grateful for the team that God has given us. By way of an update for ChinaSource, I would say that this has been both a good and tough year at ChinaSource. We've been privileged to begin following God's guidance to intentionally reach out to the next generation of missional leaders in the global church. So we're seeking to help connect them to the next generation of leaders in the church in China. This is hard, we know. It's especially hard in light of the current sensitivities, but it's not impossible. You may remember that the ChinaSource vision is to see the church in China and the global church growing and learning together in ministry that powerfully advances the kingdom of God. Throughout most of the past year, we've been involved in a content and audience analysis process that's helped us to take a good hard look at who we are and who he wants us to be going forward. So a lot of you know about our content and our publications. I would say probably fewer of you know about our partnerships, about the kingdom partnerships that the Lord continues to lead us into. So I want to share a little bit about that. We have partnerships, and you'll remember that Joanne is our vice president for China engagement and partnerships. It does a wonderful job. And we have mainly partnerships in 3 different areas. Partnerships that help to strengthen China ministry communities, partnerships that connect diaspora and Western churches, and partnerships that are content partnerships that produce and deliver timely and relevant information, analysis, and inspiration to Christ followers around the world. So one of the partnerships we have in content, you would be well aware of, is Christianity Today. We share a lot of content with them. And so that's a wonderful partnership that's been developed over the years. And you can read all about this in the ChinaSource annual report, now available at our website. So you can go to the website and check the About button at the top of the page, and then check Annual Reports button on that on the right, and you'll come up to see this, the annual report highlights from Annual Report 2022. And that includes updates and data from our content and audience analysis and information about how we sense the Lord is leading us into the future. I want to say at this point a huge thank you to all of you who, when you read this, you'll find yourselves in so much of what we're doing because you're a part of that crucial volunteer network that prays and supports and encourages and counsels and advises, helps us to strategically plan as well as partners together. Dear friends, by the way, have just put forward at the end of the year now a $50,000 matching promise, stating that they will match everything up to $50,000 that is provided up until the end of the year. So you can see how to help us with that. We're at about the $35,000 mark right now. And so we're $15,000 away. We'd really appreciate your prayerful consideration of a gift before the end of the month. You can mail it at the address you see there, or go on the website and check the donate button. But we'd be grateful if you'd be partnering with us towards the end of the year. And, you know, what we're seeking to do is to grow by building our capacity in our content and partnership base. The Lord is opening tremendous doors, even though these are sensitive times. Some of our partnerships have to be more low key. Some of them are more public. But the bottom line for us is that now is the time I should say now is not the time to abandon our calling to the church in China and to global partnership and the Great Commission. Now is the time to double down. We firmly believe that's the voice of the Lord we're hearing. To adapt, to humbly learn, to grow and embrace our God's new era of kingdom advance in China and the globe, regardless of the adversity that we face. And I'm so grateful to be a part of the team and to partner with you, because I know so many of you have that same calling. This is not a time to shrink back. It's a time to go forward. So thank you for the opportunity for us to have some growing time and edifying time together online. And it's my joy to introduce my dear friend. I hesitate now to say how long we've known each other, Brent, but Dr. Brent Fulton is our founder and catalyst, and he's going to present a couple of presentations, but the first one is an update on China and the church. Thank you, Brent.
Thank you, Kerry. What a month it has been. Back in October, all eyes were on Beijing for the 20th Party Congress. the once every 5-year event where the new leadership of the party is unveiled. And as expected, Xi Jinping gave himself a third 5-year term in office. And he pretty much packed the Politburo Standing Committee, the 7-member group that really runs things in China, with his people. And although much of this was expected, really, if you look at the totality of the 20th Party Congress and the platform that Xi is pushing forward, it's really no less extraordinary. If we consider all that Xi is doing, we really see that we are find ourselves at the end of an era. And many have used this term, but I think the 20th Party Congress really confirmed this idea that we are at the end of one chapter, the beginning of a very new chapter in China. Consider what has ended. Party norms. For almost 40 years, the party has observed term limits and age limits, and Xi has pretty much thrown those out the window, and ostensibly is going to be leader for life in China. We've seen the end of collective leadership. Beginning with Deng Xiaoping, no one leader in China was strong enough to just push through their agenda without discussion and compromise, even with other leaders in the party. Xi Jinping has emerged as the strongest leader in China since Mao, and there is really no collective leadership left. The same with factional politics. For years, the Shanghai factions and the Youth League factions have been jockeying for power, but it's very clear that the Youth League faction, represented by Hu Jintao and Li Keqiang, is really no more. And so it's the end of factional politics, as we've known it in China for the last 40 years. And then really it's the end of the reform and opening policy as we've known. Under Deng Xiaoping, China wanted to integrate more fully into the world system. Xi Jinping wants to change the world system in a way that would be more favorable to China. And economically, the party is inserting itself even more into the economy and taking much more of a leadership role in the economy, as opposed to allowing the market to have full play. And then finally, we've seen really the end of a movement towards greater separation between between party and state functions. Whereas in past years, there was an effort to more clearly delineate the party's role, which was to set the pace and call the shots, but then the state's role is to implement that. Under Xi Jinping, the party has really exerted its control over everything and in a sense shrunk the government and put all of those functions more clearly under the leadership of the party. So that was the 20th Party Congress. Then a month later, here we see protests erupting in numerous cities around China and on numerous campuses. The first time in more than 30 years that we've seen this kind of spontaneous protest break out in China. And the protests were largely around dissatisfaction with the zero COVID policy. A number of factors led up to those protests that broke out last weekend. There was reports early on in November that China would be opening up further and relaxing its COVID restrictions, and there was some hopefulness around that. But in the weeks following, it appeared that the government was in fact tightening things up again. Then there was the apartment fire in Xinjiang, when 10 people were tragically killed, ostensibly because emergency crews could not get to the building in time to put out the fire because of the lockdown situation in that neighborhood. And Xinjiang as a whole has really been under lockdown for a long time. And then people of China have been seeing on TV and on the media, the rest of the world is kind of beyond COVID in a way. They've seen people without masks. They watched Xi Jinping and his wife arrive in Bali for a conference, getting off the airplane with no masks. And here they are still being required to wear masks, and in many cases not being allowed out of their houses because of the lockdown situation. And so that just adds up to a lot of pent-up frustration, uncertainty, worry, and that spilled over in these protests that we've seen in recent days. The grand bargain that Xi Jinping and that really the party has made with the people of China over the last 40 years was, we'll give you continued economic growth and a better standard of life if you just allow us to stay in power and don't push back against the party rule. And in many ways, that grand bargain has worked. But with the COVID policy, people are realizing that the party is not keeping up its end of the bargain. China is being hurt economically, people's livelihoods are being impacted, and now people are fearing for their health and safety as the COVID lockdown policies have had a lot of unintended consequences and have harmed people's physical and mental well-being. And so there's a sense that the party is not keeping up its end of the bargain and really questioning whether the party is doing the right thing here. A couple of years ago, as thousands of people in the United States were dying each day from COVID, it was easy for the party to say, we have the better policy. We're keeping this under control. But today, many in China are not so sure. The reality is that China's population is under-vaccinated, and there are insufficient medical resources to cope in the event that there would be a great outbreak of COVID and there would be many deaths. The party is aware of that. And so whether or not Xi Jinping can thread the needle of somehow relaxing the restrictions over time, but also keeping the spread of COVID under control, minimizing the amount of deaths, that's going to be a huge challenge. On top of this, this week we received news that Jiang Zemin, the former president of China, died at the age of 96. Jiang, who was in power in the 90s and early 2000s, was a symbol of a much more open period, a much more relaxed period in China. And Jiang himself was a uniquely easygoing, gregarious leader, known for his big smile, his willingness to talk with foreign leaders and the foreign press. And in many ways, I think people now are comparing Jiang and his personality and his manner of leading to the current leader, Xi Jinping. In history in China, the death of a popular leader has led to a feeling of nostalgia. And in some cases, like Zhou Enlai's death in 1976 and Hu Yaobang's death in 1989, has served as a spark of popular discontent and has resulted in people coming out and expressing their discontent. And so Jiang Zemin's death at a time when there is already a lot of discontent bubbling beneath the surface and beginning to overflow is not a good sign for the party. And it could be that people longing for the days of Jiang Zemin, longing nostalgically for better times, are going to use this as an opportunity to further express their discontent. The media in Hong Kong was well prepared for Jiang Zemin's death. They've been practicing for a long time, actually. Back in 2011, the TV broadcaster in Hong Kong, ATV, incorrectly reported that Jiang Zemin had died. And ironically, ATV went out of business 9 years later, and Jiang Zemin was still alive at that time. Well, this year, once the news came out about Jiang Zemin's death, the Singtao Daily News was right on cue. They came out with a nice obituary about Jiang Zemin, but they forgot to insert the date of his death in the obituary when it was first published. So it was Jiang Zemin died at XX day, XX month, XX year. They've since corrected that on their website, I believe. Implications for Christians in China. Along with everybody else in China, Christians are dealing with the frustration, the inconvenience, the uncertainty of the COVID restrictions. And this is weighing heavily on believers and particularly on pastors, frustrated and trying to organize their meetings, whether online or in person, and having to change plans on a daily basis. The same measures that are being used to track COVID cases through smartphone apps and other surveillance techniques can also be used to track people for other reasons. And certainly the government is able to track Christians in a way that they weren't able to even a few years ago. And there are reports of Christian leaders being told not to travel, being limited in their travel, being tracked as they try to go from place to place. And that's made their lives more difficult. But in the midst of the pandemic, there's an opportunity for Chinese Christians to show unusual compassion and concern, and to demonstrate a stability that is hard to find in the society in China today. They've been doing that really for the last 3 years, and the pandemic continues to give believers an opportunity to show that they live a different way and they care about people in a different way, an opportunity to share the hope that they have through Christ. Xi Jinping's policies, particularly his anti-Western bias, does not bode well for Christians in China, as he sees Christianity as a Western holdover, a Western influence, and in a way his cracking down on the church is an outgrowth of his desire to push back on the West. And so really we see no end in sight of the repressive measures, including the sinicization campaign that Xi has brought out in recent years. There are still a lot of restrictions on foreigners visiting China. It's very hard to get a visa to China, although some people have been able to get business visas. But certainly it remains very difficult for Christians from outside China to visit and to be involved in China. Let me stop here and invite Carrie and Narcy up, and we together will take some questions on what's going on in China today.
I think that Carrie has dropped off for a moment, so for now it'll just be Brent and Narcy.
Okay, we're happy to take some questions if there are any. You could chat your questions, and Christiana will pick them up there.
It doesn't look like we have any questions or comments so far. Oh, here we go. We have one question. Do you see any possible, do you see the possibility of a harsher policy on churches in China?
Yes, I do in a couple areas. One is just the whole area of meeting together. The unregistered church has pretty much had to go online or to go into small group mode in the last couple of years. And with the increased surveillance on everybody in China, including religious believers, I think we will see even greater efforts to curtail people coming together. Also, the internet regulations, regulations on religious content online, which went into effect earlier this year, have already cut into what was a very vibrant Christian community online. And I'm concerned that we will see those internet regulations being applied even more stringently in the future, and further reducing the ability of believers to meet online. At this point, believers are still able to use Zoom, and they're still able to have group meetings in that way, but it's possible that those will be curtailed as well in the future.
Thanks. Next question. let's go to how can we encourage our former students or those interested who are interested in becoming believers?
I'm assuming we're talking about folks in China. I would encourage them. I mean, we're still able to email them and to send encouragement that way. And for all the crackdown on internet content, religious content on the internet, there are still materials available, still some Christian apps available, and I would direct folks to those as resources to learn more about the gospel and to grow.
Thank you. Next question. Visiting scholars coming to the number of visiting scholars coming to the US has dwindled. Do you think these trends will continue? Is it because of visa restraints?
Well, there's a number of factors here. The US has gotten more difficult in terms of getting visas, but the Chinese side has also discouraged people from going overseas or going to the West, going to America in particular for their studies. And I do see in the short term that this is going to be a continuing trend. I think we're still hopeful that things would open up at some point and there would be a greater somewhat of a return to the kind of educational and cultural exchanges that the two countries enjoyed for decades. But right now things seem to be pretty tight.
Could I jump in there for a moment too?
Yes.
We live very close to a major university here in St. Louis, and we've been volunteering with various campus ministries ever since we moved here in 2013. And of course, there was a tremendous change in the number of international students generally through COVID. But this year, we've been doing more in-person things again, and it's kind of doing this much that we did prior to COVID. And the group that my husband and I are meeting with weekly is a small group of, I don't know, can vary from 6 to 8, a little bit more, but they're all Chinese. And they're from mainland China. And some of them are newly arrived, but the majority of them are folks who came earlier as, in some cases, undergrad. I think one of the fellows came even as a high school student, but they haven't gone back. You know, it's so difficult to travel back that they've just stayed. And so we actually have, I mean, in the campus that we are most familiar with, the greatest number of international students that we have that are showing interest in the general activities and the Bible discussion groups are Chinese. And so even though we're seeing perhaps as Brent mentioned, certainly it's not as easy and maybe not as encouraged, but they're there. And our neighborhood right near that university, our neighborhood has a lot of international graduate students that live here. I hear Mandarin on the streets all the time. And so even though we might be a bit, there's probably a lot more mainland Chinese students studying in the United States than you might think, even today. And so it's still a tremendous opportunity to be reaching out. And they do ask questions. The first meeting that we had this year, two students from China came up to my husband and said, you know, we don't get the chance to go to church much in China. And under my breath, I'm going, you have. Anyway, I think a lot of times they just simply don't know themselves what's available. But they said, so we want to go to church. We want to find out what that's about. And the next Sunday they showed up at our church with us. And so the opportunities are there. The interest and the hunger is still there. We need to just be praying that we can make good contacts and good relationships with the students that we have here.
Mercy, would you like to add anything about following up with friends that you've had an opportunity to be with and then they've kind of moved on, but you still want to follow up with them and encourage them? Any ideas there?
Well, there's two things, is you just do keep in touch with them as best you can. And as most of them going back, A lot of them going back are using VPNs, and several of the ones that we've had contact with, we can still email their Gmail accounts. So those kind of things are definitely still happening. And we've been able to actually meet on Zoom with some of the graduates that we were meeting with in our living room several years ago. And it's really interesting. I mean, part of it is they just still want to keep up with their English. I mean, that's definitely a draw for them. But it's been remarkable how for the last 2.5 years, we've still kept in touch and had occasional Zoom calls with a number of students. And even to me, more exciting, I got a WeChat message about, well, I think it was about a month before Thanksgiving, where I got, oh, do you remember me? My name is Ying. And she went on to tell me that she had been in our Bible discussion group that met in our home when she was a grad student at one of the universities here. And now she's back doing her PhD at another university, but in the same area. And she wanted to know if she could come back and join us again. And she said, my English isn't still, I'm a PhD, but my English still isn't that great. And so, can we come and can I come and join you again? I had such a great time. So she's going to be joining us again this Saturday. So you make those contacts and you don't even know when they'll get back in touch with you. So it's been a joy to work with these students over the years. And they don't all go great, but 99% of them have a very positive outcome, at least in building friendships.
Thanks, Darcy.
Thank you. Another question is, how is China surviving economically?
That's a really good question. The government is having to do a lot of propping up to keep the economy going. And obviously the cost of testing everybody almost on a daily basis all across the country, and the cost of all the COVID measures have really taxed the economy. And at the same time, the hit to global supply chains and the fact that manufacturing has been affected in China. China's less of an attractive place for foreign investment these days. All of this has fed into a decrease in China's growth rate. And so growth rate estimates have been ratcheted down. China somehow continues to plod along, but certainly the pandemic has very much impacted the Chinese economy.
Thank you. How many more questions would you like for this Q&A section? Would you like one or two?
Maybe two more questions.
All right. Here is a question. Are you aware of many imprisoned pastors, just key well-known pastors or pastors of smaller groups? Are there any groups that seem to be harder hit by some of the regulations?
In terms of those who have been imprisoned, I think there's a common thread, or maybe a couple of common threads. If you look at those cases, one is unregistered groups that just got very large, and the government, went after them because of their influence and size. Another is having foreign connections. I can think of one individual in particular who is very involved with foreign groups, was doing unregistered activities and was eventually arrested. And then finally, anti-government advocacy. Pastors that have stepped over the line and tried to oppose the government, particularly publicly, have paid a price for that. And those groups have been cracked down on by the authorities. So there are not a lot of, there's not a huge number of Christians in prison because of their Christian activities, but if you look at the cases, you can see these common threads running through these cases.
All right, thank you. And one last question before the next topic. Some people are asking about the social credit score, the social credit system. Are you aware if that is still an active thing within mainland China and Hong Kong, and if it affects people in their daily life?
It's been developed and used kind of sporadically. I think it is being used as a credit score in terms of monitoring people's financial, situation, and similar to credit scores elsewhere in the world. But I think more concerning is the whole technology around monitoring the COVID situation and the way that that is now able to track people anywhere they go. And depending on the color of the indicator on their app is able to keep people from entering public buildings, even keep people from going out of their own homes. I think that technology gives us a picture of the potential of the government to use its whole surveillance apparatus to control people's lives and to control their movements. And that's certainly something to keep an eye on.
All right, thank you very much, Brent. That wraps
Thank you.
up the first.
Go ahead,
That
Christiana.
wraps up. Sure. That wraps up the first Q&A round. Thank you, everyone, for submitting your questions. We'll have a second in a few minutes.
Darcy, I think you're going to talk to us about publications. Is that right?
Okay, yes, thanks, Brent. As the situation in China has become increasingly fraught, we are grateful that God has continued to bring us good content through the many people who graciously and generously contribute their expertise, their experience, and their insights on China, the church in China, and how best to serve the greater Chinese community. The home for all that great content is the ChinaSource website. I'd like to share a few recent highlights and look ahead to some of what was coming up next year. Okay. Hang on, one technical difficulty. There we go. Okay, the ChinaSource Quarterly comes out 4 times a year. Our most recent was the 2022 autumn issue, which focused on the need for biblical and culturally appropriate member care for missionaries being sent out from China. Ruth Chang and Brent Fulton co-edited that issue, and Brent is going to talk a bit more about that in just a few minutes. Early in the year, the spring ChinaSource Quarterly provided us with an update on ministry to migrant workers in China. And then in the summer, we looked at the impact of the tiny island nation of New Zealand and what the impact it's had on the ministry in China and among their own Chinese diaspora community. We've got a few Kiwis on here. I think you ought to raise your hands. And they will for sure want to take a look at that if they haven't already and share it with their friends and family. Coming up this month, in the winter issue, we began an exploration of the impact of Xi Jinping's new era on the Christians in China. The topic is timely. As a matter of fact, you might find more answers to some of the questions that you were asking just a few minutes ago. And the topic is not just timely, but actually way too much for just one issue. So we'll continue looking at the new era in the 2023 spring issue. You may want to subscribe to the ChinaSource Quarterly to ensure that you don't miss either of those great issues. Almost every day of the week, we have something new on the website. Posts on the ChinaSource blog go up Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and they cover a wide variety of topics from a great number of contributors, each with experience and background serving in China or among the Chinese diaspora worldwide. One special edition this year was that we had our first mainland Chinese poet contribute a post about her recently published monograph. We look forward to more posts from Yang Xiaoli in the coming year. This year, we ran an occasional series about those who continue to serve in mainland China. Look for the series Still Serving in China. And there's actually going to be 2 more posts coming out in the next month or so. Dr. Easton Law, the presenter for our spring webinar, Chinese Christianity in the Modern Era, just started a monthly series unpacking that talk in greater detail, including clips from his lecture and additional information for further reflection. And we also had one rather serendipitous blog series develop as we asked people to respond to Chen Jing's post, When the Golden Age is Over. To date, we've had 6 posts responding to his challenge that we must First, assess. We must first assess in a systematic and consistent way what we did right and what we did wrong on an operational level. What should be preserved, improved, or discontinued from the past 4 decades, the 1980s to the present. But second, and even more importantly, we should engage with the success and failure of the past 4 decades missiologically. Our readers have responded to that challenge. And we've had those 6 posts, and we're expecting at least maybe 1 or more coming in the coming weeks. A new series that we're looking forward to in the new year will introduce us to peacemaking and the Ministry of Reconciliation for those who are culturally Chinese. How do these the uniqueness of the Chinese context affect those areas of reconciliation and being able to get along well? Well, we're going to look at that through a series coming up beginning in January. ZG Briefs, our Thursday post, brings you a curated list of links to recent news items about China, the Chinese church, and other related articles of interest. As the editor of ZG Briefs, Joanne Pittman, likes to say, we scan the internet so that you don't have to. And speaking of Joanne, since she can't be with us in person today, she asked me to plug an opportunity in January for you to join her in an online discussion of Ian Johnson's book, The Souls of China. If you've not read that book, or even if you have, get it, read it, and join Joanne and others to discuss it in an online group on Wednesday, January 11th of next year. You will be glad you did. This book club, as you can see from the slide, is being done with our good friends and partners at ERR China. Just Google Book Club ERR China and you'll find all the information you need. Or wait another week, and I believe Joanne's writing a blog post about it. The Lantern is our monthly newsletter, and it's where you can keep up to date on the ins and outs of all things ChinaSource, including organizational development, the comings and goings of ChinaSource staff, and the events that we're involved in. All this is available on the website, but you can also receive this great content right in your inbox by subscribing to the publications. One option you might want to consider is subscribing to the weekly digest, so that in one email, once a week on Saturday afternoon, you'll get links to everything that was published on the website that week. Now, that's where I usually end, with encouraging you to consider subscribing to our content. But I'd also like you to encourage you to consider one more content-related response. ChinaSource content is available freely on our website. With a few exceptions, you can access and share all of our articles, blog posts, webinars, podcasts, and research papers at no charge to you or to your friends if you share. But you could also let us know that you value our content by giving to help support our work. You'll see on our donation page that you can indicate your appreciation for our content by ticking publications as your preference for your gift. And there is no better time to do that than now, since your gift will be matched. So thank you much, and we look forward to having you continue to read and interact with our content. And now, back to Brent on the topic of member care for Chinese missionaries.
One of the paradoxes of China is that even as things tighten up internally on the church, we see the church sending out missionaries beyond China's borders. This is a movement that has really been going on for the last couple of decades. And although many have been sent out, there is a high attrition rate due to lack of experience, lack of preparation, unrealistic expectations about what they will do once they get to a new country. And so although probably thousands have been sent out at some point, there are currently, the number currently serving from China in other countries long-term is probably in the hundreds right now. And one of the key issues, in addition to the things I've just mentioned, is a lack of member care on the field once these workers from China get to wherever they're going to be going as missionaries. And so member care just refers traditionally to the coming alongside of missionaries in the field and providing emotional and other kinds of support for them as they adjust to the field and as they deal with the issues that all the missionaries deal with on the field. The good news is that there's a growing network of member care professionals who are focused on these missionaries being sent from China. And several of the people in this network contributed to the most recent ChinaSource Quarterly, which is on member care. In the lead article, we talk about, we answer the question, what is member care? And Dwayne and Sandy Hammock refer to member care as soul care. They say every person on earth has a spiritual reflection problem. Even those called to be missionaries and pastors will all have their best reflection tool, the Bible, all have this problem to some extent. None of us are capable yet of seeing ourselves as the triune God does every day. So a significant part of caring for the soul is helping others agree more with God about who they really are in his sight and not their own. Missionaries are neither spiritual superheroes, nor are they just cogs in a wheel. They need to understand, they need to be helped to understand how God sees them and to recognize the areas of weakness, but also to recognize that as people, God cares about them and cares about their physical and emotional health. Ruth Chang writes, we have to remember that missionaries are human too. Serving as a missionary does not mean that they are immune to problems that most people experience. As human beings, they also need what all human beings need in order to thrive and to survive. They need warmth in relationships. They need emotional support and physical sustenance. They need the support of God's people. And so member care is just coming alongside and providing the spiritual and emotional support, the encouragement, sometimes the logistical support that missionaries need on the field. And when it comes to Chinese member care, oftentimes, in addition to just the lack of resources, there's also sort of an internal resistance to member care. And there are both cultural and theological reasons behind this. And Peter, are we seeing the slide from the quarterly? I'm not sure, but anyway.
Yes.
We are, okay, thank you. In her article, Xiao Hui writes about the need for rest for missionaries. And part of member care is simply helping people to slow down and to find rest in the midst of the busyness of the missionary life. But in Chinese culture, there's a resistance to that. Chinese culture is embedded with this idea of diligence and hard work. And so you think of some of the Chengyu or some of the sayings that Chinese children memorize even at an early age. Things like bend one's body to the task and exhaust one's energy until one's heart ceases to beat. Diligence is the means by which one makes up for one's dullness. Diligence is the mother of success. Strive unremittingly. Every second counts. And so within the Chinese culture, there's this high value placed on hard work. And there's also this idea of chuku, or eating bitterness. The idea that anything that's worthwhile is going to require suffering. And so to tell somebody they need to slow down, they need to care for themselves, they need to take a rest, well, that runs counter to what they've been told culturally. And then this idea of chuku, or eating bitterness, also runs into the theological obstacle that is met when we try to introduce member care. In his article, Dennis Ahern looks at the lives of 3 of China's most popular Christian leaders over the years. And in each of the 3 lives that he looks at, Watchman Nee, Wang Mingdao, and John Song, he finds that suffering was central to their experience. And each of them wrote and spoke a lot about suffering in the Christian life. And so the idea is that part of my Christian identity, my Chinese spirituality, must involve suffering. Dennis Ahern uses the illustration of mapo tofu, one of his favorite dishes when he was a missionary in Taiwan. And he says, if you take the tofu out of mapo tofu, the dish is incomplete. The dish no longer exists. And in the same way, if you try to remove suffering from the Chinese Christian identity, then it's as if we've lost our identity. And so Ahern says, yes, the Bible tells us that we've not only been called to believe on Christ, but also to suffer for his sake. But yet, we are not to use that to say that, well, we should encourage people to suffer more, or we should not purposely seek suffering as evidence of our spirituality. As Dennis says in his article, maybe we're called to eat bitterness, but we are not called to feed bitterness to our Chinese brothers and sisters by ignoring their needs on the field. And then in his article on fatherhood, Daniel Schur looks at the erroneous belief that if I ignore my family, that's okay because God will take care of them. As long as I'm serving the Lord, I'll be okay. And that misinterpretation of biblical teaching has led, unfortunately, among Chinese leaders to a tendency to say it's almost spiritual if I'm not spending time with my family, or if I'm not tending to my family needs, because the ministry is more important than the family. And Daniel encourages missionaries from China to take a new look at that and to realize that their first mission field is actually at home. And then continuing this theme of family, Lisa Tsai in her article looks at marriage and family among Chinese missionaries. Lisa Tsai is a counselor from China who's done extensive research on the missionaries that have been sent out from China. And a few takeaways from Lisa's research. One is that children's education and marital satisfaction are among the top 5 factors in premature departure from the field. Children's education and marital satisfaction. She also found, though, that despite the amount of stress that the missionaries often encountered, doing mission together actually allowed the couple to experience higher marital satisfaction. She found that the more freedom that missionary spouses had in determining their own ministry role, the less conflict they had, and the happier they would be on the field. And then she found finally that a shared calling, shared expectations, particularly around their children's education, and a shared experience as a couple are really key to their long-term thriving on the field. A lot of insights there on the relationship between the missionaries' family life and their effectiveness on the field. Finally, in this issue, we looked at a new resource that's just come out, which is a handbook on Chinese missionary member care, the first of its kind. Ruth Chang was one of the co-editors of this handbook. And this handbook is available in Chinese. It can be ordered from Ambassadors for Christ. And it's also available in English from the Narramore Christian Foundation. And links to both of those are in the article in the quarterly, if you'd like to find more about that handbook. So this is just a brief look at what's in the latest quarterly and some of the issues that are facing the missionaries being sent out from China and what's being done to help to address the need for member care for these missionaries. We've got time, I think, for maybe 1 or 2 questions before we wrap up here.
We had one question so far.
Mm-hmm.
Someone's asking, who sends out these Chinese missionaries from China to other countries, and which countries are they being sent to?
Yes, so many of them are sent by their own congregations. And that's proved problematic, and for a couple of reasons. One is the congregations often don't know how to support their missionaries once they're sent out, and that contributes to the need for member care. But then secondly, with the pandemic and the increased restrictions on the church, many of those who've been sent out have lost touch with their sending churches. There are also some indigenous sending organizations that have arisen in China that are training and sending out missionaries. And then finally, there are some international organizations that have created teams that involve missionaries from China, and they have helped to facilitate some of these missionaries leaving China and going to other parts of the world. In terms of where they're ending up, they're really all over the world. We've talked to Chinese missionaries in Europe, Africa. There are many in the Middle East, Southeast Asia, really all over the place. And one that we know of is actually a truck driver in the United States. He moved his family here specifically to be a missionary, and he's driving a truck to support himself. And so there are many models and many interesting examples of those who have been sent out.
All right, thank you. Do we have time for one more? Or do we want to go into the conclusion and breakout rooms?
I think we maybe one more question.
All right, so last question. Is there a people group focus among these senders and sent ones? Are they focusing on anyone in particular?
I think many of them do have a very sharp people group focus. They've done a lot of research themselves on the unreached and unengaged people groups. And for many of them, their sending is to specific people groups around the world.
I might jump in here for just a second and mention
Yes.
that we do have a post coming up sometime in the near future that's based on an interview with one of the sending leaders from China. And I think you'll probably find that to be very interesting to hear from him directly through that blog post.
All right, thank you very much. And with that, Carrie, are you going to lead us out?
Yes, can you hear me okay?
We can indeed.
Oh, good. My computer, that Wi-Fi has been spotty. I'm back on my phone. Thank you. I would like to, if we could, just before we go into our breakout groups, if we could look at the prayer requests for today. There's so many things that are happening currently that we would be well to pray about. So we wanted to put these up for you. Some of you may have to leave here at the top of the hour, just so you could be mindful of these prayer requests. These are prayer requests that we've received from friends in the mainland and from people on the ground that are facing and expressing their thinking and needs. Please pray for churches and church leaders in China whose days are full of COVID-19 disruptions and pressures. While there's a growing tiredness and frustration with the dynamic zero COVID controls, there's also a strong fear of death among the general population. So we can be praying that Emmanuel will encounter those who don't know him and are afraid of dying. And then one thing we could do in our groups would be to pray 1 Timothy 2:1 and 2 for the leaders of the country, as well as all citizens in this really sensitive time. A Chinese friend recently told a brother in China, we're praying for a revival like they read about in England or the USA. He meant a national revival that in centuries past. He was acknowledging that there are things of the heart and the deep heart and the soul that political and ideological solutions cannot touch. And then please pray, as Brent has just shared with us, for the missionaries being sent from China, that they would receive proper preparation for their transition to life in a new culture. Pray for those coming alongside to care and nurture them. It'd be great if we go into our groups, and Christiana, you'll tell us how we're going to do that. But then we can introduce one another and share where we're at, and then we can move into prayer together. Thank you.